Jim Mallard.
Any paranormal activity, go inside a world that others don't want to see. It's the Mallard Report. Yeah, the Mallard Report.
That it is. It is the Mallard Report, and I welcome you all thank you all for listening. Welcome you all to the program. My guest tonight is David Paulides. Did I say that right? I didn't even ask you about that.
Enough.
Well, say it right. Say it right. Make me mad.
Paulides.
We'll see if I can get that right later. Be a quiz on me for that later. So I guess I just want to dive. Well, I don't want to dive right into the deep end. I kind of want to skim across the water and then we'll jump. What got you interested in missing people?
Well, I was doing some research at a national park, and happened to notice a couple of rangers following me around. Make a long story short, one at a time, they kind of told me their story and approached me and said that they had some information about missing people, and they said that they had worked at national parks in the past and there had been missing people there, and they thought that the circumstances behind the disappearance, where they disappeared from, the lack of information after that first 10-day search cycle, they kind of compared notes after they got together, and they realized that something was amiss, and they thought that somebody ought to be looking into it. That's how it all got started years ago, and I started to file a series of Freedom of Information Act requests against the National Park Service, and started to get rebuffed at higher levels and told that they don't keep lists of missing people, et cetera, and talked to some law enforcement friends, and we all agreed that there is something here that we need to look at, and that's how it started. And
Wait, I need to stop you for a second, just to be really clear about this. The National Park Service does not keep a list of missing people.
That's correct.
Okay.
They have a large contingent of National Park police that are trained at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. These guys are better trained than most police officers in small and medium-sized cities in the U.S. And the idea that any police department that you could walk into, that their chief wouldn't have a list of missing people on his desk within 30 minutes is ridiculous. And I doubt that any chief would stand for it. And missing people are a high priority item. It's one of those things that you just got to know. And the National Park Service, according to many of the best investigative journalists in the U.S., they do know, but they won't admit it, and they won't give up the list.
See, I'm just imagining there'd be a wall of pictures even, or information about these people posted, so people could look for them.
Absolutely, and many of the police departments in the U.S. have a website and a link with photos of missing people. And most, in fact, all investigators I know, they want publicity on missing person cases. They want the face of those people in front of the public, as do the family and relatives. But the National Park Service is that anomaly. They don't want those faces out there in front of the public. They don't want the public to know who's missing on their property, and they don't want them to know the circumstances.
So this all pushed you to write a book about these missing people the first time. How did that all come together? Because I can't imagine that. I mean, it's one thing to start poking around and start filing Freedom of Information Act requests, and then it's a whole other to put it in the book.
Well, it took a while, because when they're not giving you the info, you have to go out and dig around and archive it and go to libraries and do it the hard way. And we did, and we got a lot of information that first year. And there was really no hidden agenda about writing a book, but after we accumulated the data and we started to sift through it, it became pretty obvious that there were some interesting points that caused linkage amongst many of these disappearances. And it was that linkage that caused me to write this very large book that was separated into two books, Missing 411 Eastern U.S. and Missing 411 Western U.S. They came out within a month of each other. Essentially, they were one book split into two, geographically.
Which is, I didn't get the first. I picked up later on here, but what was the reaction like once you kind of broke the egg, so to speak, to all of that?
Well, after I started to publicize the linkage and the facts surrounding it, I think initially there was a lot of skepticism that maybe this was all fabrication, Maybe this was just my own thoughts. And as years have gone on, and the people that have actually read the books understand that, hey, these are factual, there is this unusual linkage, and it's only gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And one of the important points that we believe we first noticed that first couple of years was that there were geographical clusters of missing people in the U.S., in national parks and forests. And as time has gone on, we started, I think, with 28 clusters in North America back in that third year or fourth year, and now we're up to 59 geographical clusters. They're predominantly up and down the eastern coast of the U.S., Idaho, Montana, then down through Wyoming and Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona. There are almost 0 cases in Nevada. And then right down through the center point of the U.S., north to south, there's a huge zone with no disappearances. And then there are cluster zones all the way around the Great Lakes and up and down the Appalachian Trail on the eastern coast of the U.S. So it's pretty defined, and it's pretty obvious, and the biggest geographical cluster of missing people anywhere is in Yosemite National Park.
Which seems interesting to me because, I guess unless you get off the beaten trail, even some of the stories that I was reading that you've even being on the beaten trail isn't safe.
Well, I think that initially everyone thought, well, they're way off the trail, they're in the backcountry, things can happen. But the reality of it is there's many disappearances in Yosemite that happen right on that valley floor that defy conventional explanation. Back in the 50s, there was a graduate student from UC Berkeley who was there with his family on vacation. He says, hey, I'm only going to take a 45-minute hour walk around the valley. I'll be right back. He never came back. He was never found, and he's gone. Well, 3 or 4 months later, another UC graduate student also takes a walk around that valley floor. He disappears. He's never found. The guys didn't know each other. They weren't in the same major. There was no connect the dots other than they went to the same school. And, of course, the rangers in the park didn't tell that second family that, hey, this just happened 3 months earlier, but some other people did. And they got a hold of the first family, and they said, hey, wow, the similarities are baffling, and we can't find our kids. So the families together wrote a letter to President Eisenhower asking for military troops to come into the park because they said, number one, our kids would never just walk away. Number two, they've got to be held or they've got to have been abducted some way. And I got the letter from the Eisenhower Library, and Eisenhower, the best I can tell from all the docs I have, he never even responded. And so to think you have to be in the backcountry to disappear? No, not true. And that's one of the very, very unusual cases that are fairly common in Yosemite if you look over the decades.
Chat room wants me to ask you, do you believe there is a list from the National Park Service that they're hiding from you? Or they just aren't formally compounding?
Well, let me use the words from the best investigative journalist in the world, in my humble opinion, and that's George Knapp. And in his words, they're blatantly lying. They have a list, and they don't want to give it up.
I would imagine they have. I mean, they document it like when you sneeze in these national parks, it seems, at times. Well, just don't have to have a list of... this doesn't make sense to me.
They have, and this is on our website, they have a list of all the movies that have been filmed on national parks. And that list, they maintain it at nps.gov, and that list is on our website to show you that they do have the ability to keep lists.
Just craziness. But okay, so what's fast? We just talked about the first two, and then there was 3 more to get us to this one. Now this is 6, so there'd be 4 more to get us. 3 more. This is the 6th one, the new one about hunters. And I'm not going to lie to you. When I opened the package and I seen it was from you, I'm like, oh, good. I was looking forward to it, and then I looked at the cover, and I went, hunters. Oh, David, that's funny. It's on April Fool's Day though, because I never would have figured or believed that you could fill this nice-sized book full of missing hunters and fishermen.
Well, It's unusual to say the least, and I would have never thought so either, except as you kind of sift through documents month after month, you start to get an accumulation of cases, and again, they have this unusual linkage to them. And then when you start to put the cases together, you start to think, wow, these hunters have disappeared under very similar circumstances time after time. And most of the time, hunters go back to an area that they've hunted before. And a lot of times in these stories that I put in the book, it's their own property that they've owned for decades. So they know it like the back of their hand. And they disappear. Huge search parties go in. They're not found. Sometimes they're carrying walkie-talkies. They don't answer. These guys are armed. So they have an added level of security in the minds of many. And plus, they know the area that they're in. So the idea that they got lost makes no sense.
Yeah, because I'm sitting here thinking, out of all the people that we could put out in the woods, so to speak, I mean, they're ready for the weather, they're armed, they're, know where they're going. This would be the ideal candidate to send somebody out and not have them get lost, let alone come up missing for however long or forever. I'm still dumbfounded by this whole, I've read the book, parts of it multiple times, and I'm still sitting here going, how did that, there's what, 100 and some odd stories in here? How many stories is in here?
143, I think.
I'm just dumbfounded that you were, and there's probably more that didn't make the cut, I'm assuming?
Oh, absolutely. And, the idea that we're going to be able to uncover all of the stories of missing people is ridiculous. And there's, in the National Park Service and in the U.S. Forest Service, there's a classification called missing presumed dead. And those people aren't on any missing person logs. They aren't talked about as being missing. They're dead, they're gone, and they're forgotten about. And the idea is that they get them off the rolls. They're no longer a current case. And a lot of times, the family has to get to that point in their life because, say, a husband and a wife own a home. For the wife to sell the home, she has to get a verdict from a superior court that her husband's deceased. And then she has the control of the property and can sell it. Well, once that person's listed as deceased, they're no longer missing. But more times than not, it's the National Park Service or the Forest Service that has this classification, missing presumed dead. And then they're off the rolls, they're gone. Trying to find that case is 1 in a zillion.
Yeah, I when I was reading, when you mentioned that the first time in the book, I went, snap, that's horrible, because then once they're dead, forget it. Unless they're unearthed or found somewhere, nobody's paying attention looking for them anymore. And even if they are found, it's going to be hard to identify them then because they're already dead, so nobody's looking at the records for the missing person then.
Up until just recently, I would say probably within the last 20 years, the idea of ever identifying them would have been zero. But with an organization called NAMUS, N-A-M-U-S, and it's administered by the National Institute of Justice, and what they do is they're the national repository for DNA. So NAMUS investigators will go out and meet with a missing person's family, take DNA, put that in their database, and hold it so if there's ever remains that are found in that area, they can compare DNA. But before NAMUS was around and before DNA was really around, the chances of ever figuring it out were almost zero.
Yeah, it's just, technology is great, but man, that's just horrible to think about all of this. Just horrible to think about what was before, trying to track it down or never tracking it down. So, I want to stroll a little bit here for a second. So you're sorting through these. How does that process go? You're looking for information and you find information. What about the information people send you? Do you have a system for breaking it up into different categories then?
Well, absolutely. There's probably 1 or 2 cases every week across North America that come to our desk of people that are missing, that on the face look like they fit this profile we're looking for. And this summer, it's been a bumper crop. I'm serious. It's been an unbelievable summer for missing people, too many of them. And that's why the word has to get out there that you got to hike in pairs. You got to tell people where you're going. You got to carry a personal locator transponder. That's like an EPIRB device that you activate it. It sends a signal to a satellite. Satellite sends a signal to the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. They see where you're at. They call the local search and rescue, and they can get within 10 feet of where that satellite transponder activated. The cost of those is between $150 and $300, and I think you're a fool if you don't carry one. As I stated in the Hunter's book, I think 95% of these guys, if they would have had one, they would have been found. And a lot of hunters, there's a lot of machoism and things. Hey, just put it in your backpack. Don't even tell anybody. But if you disappear, it's going to be your best friend.
Yeah, I mean,
So
yeah.
So that's one of the many things I say to carry. Personally, I carry one of those, and I carry a satellite phone every time I go into the woods. And I also am armed every time. There's not a case that I know about where a hunter disappeared carrying a satellite transponder. Those two things together, I have not found a case where someone's disappeared. Not saying it hasn't happened, but I haven't seen it yet. I've seen one case where a person had an emergency locator. It went off. He was later found in very unusual circumstances, dead from a fall. This last summer, somebody, just a month ago, disappeared, and he had a tracking device that just threw out a signal every so many minutes. And that device threw out a signal on the opposite side of a river of where the known trail was at. They went to that location. His kids said, hey, he'd never be on that side of the river, but that's where it hit. They went out and looked, and they didn't find him. So in each of those cases, the guys weren't carrying a firearm. Now, I'm not saying that that's the end-all answer. I'm just saying, hey, those are the facts, as I know them.
Well, it makes it, I mean, like I said, it was surprising because these would be the people that I would trust the most out there. But then again, I guess we can get too confident or cocky as the word you were using a few minutes ago, and I guess that could be our own downfall.
Well, one of the things that even surprised me is there's a case out of Maine and there's a case out of the Adirondacks where real elderly people, hunters, disappeared. And these guys were not very mobile. One guy only had one eye. He was carrying a walkie-talkie. Nobody thought that these two guys could go far. And in separate instances, they both disappeared, and they were never found. Their guns weren't found. Their equipment wasn't found. It's like they're gone. And it makes zero sense. Whereas somebody who's young, healthy, can tromp around a long ways in the mountains, that's easier to swallow. But when somebody isn't mobile, it doesn't make good sense.
No, like I said, some of these were just kind of baffling to me about, it's just, I don't know. There's always a few in here that make me scratch my head. Not that most of them don't, because when I read these books, I read probably 2 or 3 cases at a time, and I have to put it down and go, man, that could be you out there getting lost, or trying to put one of my family members. So it just takes me a while to get through it, which is, I don't want to say a bad thing, but when you're trying to get through it, it kind of is at times. I don't even know where I was going with that. That's good. And you were worried about saying something you would regret. That's okay. One of the questions I'm going to skip here for a minute. One of the questions I've been asked a lot about today is the update on the documentary.
So the documentary is done.
Okay.
It's sitting at a film festival right now, getting reviewed. And if it goes to that film festival, it has to if it goes to any film festival, it has to premiere there, or they won't accept it. And really, it has to get into a film festival if we want the maximum exposure to the topic. And if it goes, obviously, we'll tell the public right away. It's been viewed by some people already privately, and George Knapp was one of those guys. He gave it a roaring approval. He said it was unbelievable. Another guy who saw it, Les Stroud, Survivor Man, and he said it was great. And for Stroud to say that, it's pretty darn good. So we're pretty proud of it. The guys did a tremendous job. It took us a long time to get to that point where we were happy with it. So I would say probably the end of this year, early next year, be a public release of it.
I personally can't wait, because after reading the book, I mean, I don't know. After reading the books, I'm excited for it on one hand, because then, you know, it'll bring it to life. But like I said, I sit there and think about these stuff. I've pretty much seen some of these cases playing out in my head, so I don't know if it's going to give me nightmares or not. No.
Well, again, there's a lot of people who don't want to read a book, and a lot of people who would rather watch a movie or see a video. So it'll probably bring a lot more people to the table to understand the topic than we had before, which is good. On the opposite end of that scale, in a movie, you can't get down into the minutia of the data on individual cases like you can in a book. And I try to tell people that, you know, believe about 5 or 10% of what you read or see on the internet. And most people don't get that. I'm telling you that the vast majority of the videos out there are designed to do one thing, and that's just to get hits. The more hits they get, the more money that guy makes who put it up. So we put up a series of videos on missing people on our YouTube page, Can-Am Missing. And on those, we actually go out to the scene, we interview victims, witnesses, etc. So it's a different aspect. It's more to give it some visual clarity of the locations where these people visited or went lost. Just a couple months ago, I was in Australia, and that's where the latest videos went up. And the Australian cases are almost cookie cutters to what the U.S. cases are as well. But again, I tell people, don't think that every video you see out there on a topic related to mine is related. And if you see my name out there associated with a video, don't believe it unless it's our webpage, Can-Am Missing. And the other thing is that don't, and this is a difficult one. People listen to a lot of interviews I do. And if you took all the interviews I've done, I'm going to guess we covered about 5% of the facts in all the cases in the books. So don't think that you've got all that knowledge base. There's tables, graphs, lists, and facts that I would never have the time to talk about in each one of these cases that really key it in on us. And about once a week, I'll get an extensive email from somebody out there who's listened to it and says, hey, I have the answer. I know what this is. And, you know, I probably have 25 by now thesis-length documents explaining exactly what's causing all these disappearances. And I swear to God, this is the truth. I have never had one of those emails from anybody who's read the 6 books. Because once you understand the 6 books, you'll realize that there isn't a scenario that fits all of those instances.
No. Because I thought I had it figured out, too, and I was like, I got this. And then I read the next case, and it's like, forget that. That won't work there. So...
Well,
I didn't send you a thesis length email either. If I send you a thesis length email, or anybody out there listening, be concerned because my email must have been hacked. No.
Yeah. Well, I'll look for it though, Jim. Okay.
Like I said, be aware though, because it probably came from somebody else. So I've got to. Man, they love this national park stuff. Has anybody at the national park provided anonymous information or in any branch of law enforcement to you about these missing people or cases related?
I was at a national park with a friend, and we were doing some research on a case, and I walked into this little office off of their head. This wasn't anywhere near headquarters. It was in another part of the park, and there were these 4 guys sitting around this table. And they were talking like they really knew the inner workings of the Park Service. And a couple of them looked retired, and a couple of them looked like they still worked there. And I told my friend, I said, I'm waiting, I'm not leaving. The first guy that walks out of this office, I'm going to go talk to him because they have some fascinating info. One guy ends up walking out, and I followed him into the parking lot, and I cautiously and politely approached him, and I told him who I was and what I did, and he goes, well, come here, let's talk. And he was really nice. And he introduces himself, and he goes, well, Dave, I'm a retired special agent from the National Park Service. And what he is, he's the investigator that gets these cases and investigates them. And he just had recently retired. And I explained the problems I was having and the obstruction I was getting. And I'll quote this man. He says, it's an issue of integrity, Dave. many layers of the National Park Service don't have any integrity. And I was with this friend of mine, and we were both floored that he was saying it. And he goes, hey, you're having the same problems I've had in my career. And he says, it's not uncommon. He goes, he told me of an instance where he almost made a criminal case against the superintendent of a park. And he was called by people high up in the Park Service and told to drop the case. And he said, it just leveled me, because that goes to the core of who he was as a person. You know, you don't drop cases just because it's somebody high up in the Park Service. And we ended up talking for a long time. That one man probably enlightened me to the inner workings of the Park Service more than anything else. As far as anybody else coming forward, I think everybody there is afraid. And if you've read some of my books, there's a story in there about a National Park Service ranger who disappeared. And there's been two that have disappeared on duty. One was found under really unusual circumstances, dead in his own park. And when his wife tried to claim survivor benefits, the Park Service denied her, saying that, oh, he must have just quit and ran away. There's no evidence of that. And then they did it almost again on the second case where the person was never found. And the way that they treat their employees is horrific sometimes. And no, it's. I wish more people would feel comfortable to come forward, because if anybody did come forward and ask for anonymity, I'd guarantee it for sure. Just like I guaranteed it to this retired special agent. But the truth is that there's a lot of other venues to go to get your answers. But it would be nice if somebody did come forward.
So how about coming from the other direction, from like a senator or representative? Like, have you contacted any of them asking for assistance or help trying to get the information together?
Absolutely. When I went through Yosemite to get a case on an open missing persons case, the special agent assigned to Yosemite said, nope, you're not going to get that case. And I said, well, why not? And he says, well, you're just never going to get it. He was kind of being real cocky. And his name was Stephen Yu, Y-U. And Agent Yu said, nope, you're not going to see it. And I said, well, that case has been in a file for over 40 years. I doubt anybody's looked at it in 20 years. He goes, you're right. And I said, well, why wouldn't you release it? He goes, you're never going to see it. And I said again, well, there's other parks in the system that have active missing persons cases, and I've always gotten those cases. They want the publicity. He goes, you're not getting this one. Well, I took that and I appealed it through a local congressman who went to the National Park Service and had his contact in Washington, D.C. make the contact with the National Park Service. They denied it, and then we appealed it through this appeal process, and they said, well, since the National Park Service is claiming it's an open case, we're going to deny your appeal. But what people don't understand is that a missing persons case isn't a criminal investigation. It's one of those weird cases in law enforcement that law enforcement has that isn't criminal. It's not a crime to disappear. It's not a crime to decide to disappear and not talk to anybody. But it's something that they have to investigate. Now, why would they not make a missing persons case with no criminal element involved a public document? Probably because they don't want to be embarrassed about something.
Which is, again, just, ridiculous to think about. What they do, what can be so incriminating in the report? I guess maybe the lack of a report, maybe. I guess is the only thing I can think of.
Well, as I've been made aware of hundreds of times by people, is that when President Obama went into office, one of the things he said is that he was going to make government more transparent. And if anything, just according to my knowledge with trying to get things out of the National Park Service and the Department of the Interior, it's just the opposite. They fight it tooth and nail every way, every second of that trip.
It's just stupid. Because all I'm picturing is the 50s milk carton with the kid's face in the side of it right now. Missing Billy Smith and the little information they put on, as cheesy as that was. But I guess it worked because back in the day there was no social media that helped spread the word, so I guess it worked. Well, may have worked.
Well, that was really the only way back then to get somebody's picture across the U.S. quickly.
And then you're telling me about people that don't want the information out there. It's just kind of... Well, I'm sure you've spent probably some sleepless nights trying to figure this all out, and it seems to me that you still have more questions than answers about it all.
You know, the more cases you read, the less I think I understand, because, I mean, the things just happen over and over again, and I read the stories about the victims' families and how they're treated. We filmed a segment in Mesa Verde National Park for the movie. It didn't make the cut in the movie, but we still have the footage, and we're going to do something with it, just don't know what. But a family, husband and wife, go with friends to Mesa Verde for a little short break, and the husband says he's going to walk down this trail just a little bit, and he walks down the trail, and he never comes back. And there's a little bit of a search, not a huge one, and the wife says, hey, she wants to hire a private helicopter to fly this valley and look for her husband. And they said, nope, you can't do that. And no real clear explanation that she gave me why they said no. And she told me at the time that she felt like it was just odd the way they handled this, and they weren't really pushing hard, in her opinion, to find her husband. So we got the proper permits. We go back to that park a couple years later with the family, and we're there to interview the park's people and the family and have them show us. And if I wasn't there, I wouldn't have believed it. How that family was treated was abysmal. Now, you got to remember, when you're in that park, that's their land in their mind. They control it. They control access. And the superintendent would not come out of his office to even look at the wife or the son, which was a 23, 24, 25-year-old man. They wouldn't even come out. The chief ranger wouldn't even come and talk to them. It was a receptionist that said, nope, they're not going to come out. Nope. Well, to talk to us for the movie, they sent a ranger over to us. And we interviewed him away, and we said, hey, what is going on? And you could tell by his mannerisms and by his attitude, he was embarrassed, greatly embarrassed.
As he should be. I'm sitting here thinking that's horrible.
Well, when we asked him about specifics on the search, he said, I was told not to say anything. I said, why were you told not to say anything? This is public information. I can't say anything. He just kept looking at the ground. And that the attitude towards the victims, I don't know how those people can live with themselves.
I'm going to say this so you don't have to. That's more damning than not having a list.
And you know, the truth of the matter is, when you talk to victims' families, I hate to say this, but there's many of them that have suffered very similar consequences from government agencies when they start looking for people. It's like they want that problem to go away. They don't want to look you in the face. They don't want to deal with you, and they want you to leave.
Well, that was one of the questions that popped up here in the chat room was, what as a friend or a family member of a missing person, what avenues should they be pursuing? Based off what you're telling me, it's going to be a uphill road to try to find your loved one.
Personally, what I would do is I would get an uncle, an aunt, somebody who is smart, number one, number two, has a ton of patience, and number three, is tight with the family. I would say, okay, your job right now is to go to the local congressman's office right now and get one of their aides to come out here to the search site and just observe how we're being treated and how much really of an effort is going on. And because sometimes it's hard to believe when people come and tell you this, but get one of their aides to go out there with you and observe it. Because once a congressman or a senator gets involved, it seems like everything starts to change. Because they've got some political women in Washington, D.C. They can call for Senate hearings. They can call for congressional hearings. But if it was my relative, that's exactly what I would do. because I would hold them accountable for exactly what they did and how they treated me.
Fascinating. I mean, you should. I mean, you'd think you wouldn't have to go that route, but I guess here we are because, based off everything I've heard tonight, put that number in speed dial. Jeez.
Well, you think that in these little cities out in the middle of nowhere that have maybe one or two news channels or one or two NBC or ABC affiliates in the area, you got to remember that those crews have to live day in and day out around that park and get information out of them a year later after your case is long gone. So for them to really do the stand-up thing and publicize and put on the news exactly how crappy you're being treated, sorry to say, that's not going to happen because they've got to live in that community every day. Now, a national news team goes in there, that's different. But that local news crew, they're not going to do the right thing because they've got to live in that environment.
You do have a very valid point now that you mentioned that. I mean, because I've seen it in a different format, but nevertheless, of how local news kind of plays favorites. There, I'll be nice, and how they report things. Everybody has their spin and objective, but sometimes it's just outlandish in the extremely local news, like your local papers, not even local TV stations, the local paper. Anyways, here I go trying to get myself in trouble.
No, keep talking, Jim.
Well, when there's only one paper in town, guess what you can say? You can say pretty much anything you want, and if you don't know any better, it's all gospel, right? Okay, there, I've said it. No, to a degree.
True.
So that'd be the one thing you do is get assistance from anything else that pops to mind before we get off this topic about how to help search for a missing person.
Probably the other thing I'd do is I'd get somebody in my family to video record everything. Every time I talked to somebody, every time I was around somebody that was an official, I'd want everything recorded just so they couldn't change their story and people would believe exactly what I claimed. Because again, what I hear from families, what I heard from the family from Mesa Verde, I would never say I don't believe it, but I just shook my head, okay. And then when I went out there and saw it firsthand, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I don't care what rationale they had for treating that family that crappy. Under the circumstances of them losing their father, they get a pass in my book for anything that they've done because there's no ill intent. They're trying to find their relative.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, even if you got mouthy with the park ranger, you were there filming. I mean, maybe this is my cockiness. I'd be out there with the big grin and saying, well, we did everything we could. Looking right in that camera, just trying to get it to go away again. Even if we didn't do everything. But to avoid the whole thing is kind of, like I said earlier, speaks volumes about what's going on. So, we've reached this point where I'm going to flip the questions. Normally I'd ask you this question last but I want to be sure to get this out there because where do people get these books? We were talking about this a little bit before the show, and that's why I'm kind of giggling because I kind of know the answer, but...
Yeah, please don't go to Amazon because I get a lot of bad emails saying, why are we charging so much for the books on Amazon? And those are resellers, and we won't sell to a reseller, and we've got about 35 of them that we've identified. We won't sell to them, but every once in a while somebody sneaks in and gets a few books from us and puts them on Amazon for some exorbitant price. You come to our website, the books are $24.95, and that's Canadian American, like can. The actual address is CAN, C-A-N as in Nora, A-M as in Mary, canamissing.com. And all the books are in stock. Don't go to Amazon. You'll just get ripped triple the price, quadruple the price, or more.
And they were asking about shipping to Canada. Is that an issue? Or is that...
So we only ship via priority mail domestic, priority mail international. We used to ship by media mail. And the problem is it takes sometimes a month to get there, And a lot of times it arrives and the goods are damaged. We made a decision because the claim rate was so high, we're only going to ship priority mail. And unfortunately, the price is high, but they get there in a week to 10 days. We have not had one claim for a damaged product. So we're not going to change because we stopped shipping internationally for a couple months because the claims were so high. We figured it out. Priority mail is the only way to go in our mailing. We won't go back.
I agree. And hey, if you want to spend $1,200 on a book, I have the sixth book right here, the Hunter's Edition, and you can have my little notes and dog-eared book for $1,200. Seems like a great deal. If you want to pay that much for one of the books instead of going to his website, go ahead. I'll hook you up. I already told David I'd split it with him if somebody steps up and pays $1,200 for his books. So.
Oh no, don't split it with me. I'm not like that. You can have it for $25.
I know. Well, hey, if you want it for $25, but if you want to pay $1,200, I'll send you the $600 check, David. Not you personally, but whoever is stupid enough to pay me the money instead of paying you the money. Speaking of the book, you said there was over 140 cases in here, and I especially requested to talk about one tonight. See, this is what you were talking about. If you listen to this interview, we're going to get into this one case out of the 140, and anybody who's read David's books and hasn't read this Hunter's one yet, what do you call that story at the end? The Predator story?
Yeah.
That is worth the $25 right there. But just for the record, for the people out there listening who haven't got into it, but I wanted to talk to you about Robert Springfield, Bugsy Springfield, from Montana, for a number of reasons. Because this one just kind of it seemed to hit all the whistles. Because I mean, they seemed to be out there searching with helicopters and all this other things. And then the part that caught my attention, maybe you can help me understand this, is when the FBI got involved. Because it doesn't seem the FBI gets involved in too many of these cases. Why is that?
Well, the truth of the matter is that in some of the books, in a specific series of disappearances, there's a series of them in the Great Smoky Mountains that I wrote about where a certain FBI agent showed up in all the cases. And he said he wasn't investigating, he was just monitoring. And in all of the cases, they were all like cookie cutters of each other. And I wrote about this in the Eastern book. And there was no rhyme or reason why the FBI was there, because there was no indication there was a crime. These were missing people, yet he showed up on everyone and he was documenting all of them. Well, my old partner went on to become an FBI agent when I was in law enforcement, and he became an FBI agent in charge for a big jurisdiction in the United States. And the FBI documents everything. And they take those documents and they send them to headquarters. And many of those reports they write go to the profiling unit. The profiling unit kind of does what I've been doing with the cases here, is they look for similarities on other cases. Well, this one FBI agent went to all these cases in a 10, 15-year span. And he documented everything really well. Well, when I wrote the book, or right about the time I was coming out with the book, I was told by somebody that this agent had committed suicide. And I confirmed it. And I thought that was really odd, because he was in the middle of some of the weirdest cases I had ever written about. So many people thought. The fact is, the FBI does arrive at a lot of these missing persons cases, but they're not investigating, they say. They're just monitoring and collecting facts. Now, in this case, there wasn't an FBI agent that even arrived at the scene. They were called in because after the remains were found, so many people thought it was so suspicious that they wanted the FBI to work the remains to see if they could figure out a cause of death. But the unusual part of this case from 2004 was that they held those remains for 4 years and wouldn't give them back to the family. And the family ended up having to file a federal lawsuit against the FBI to get the remains back, and then also sued them because they didn't do any investigation into the cause of death. This is the only case I know of like this where the family had to sue to get the remains back. But the unusual part to me is that why wouldn't the FBI just give them back?
Yeah, I mean, that like I said, this one really stood out. And for anybody that may have a theory about these cases, read this case and then go, no, none of it works. None of it fits, because why would you keep bones for years? I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, when you say it out loud, it's still baffling as much as it was the first time I picked it up and read it. I don't understand why you would keep them and make the fight. I mean, I'm putting the family member shoes back on now. You know, not they found the body, but finally some closure. They found a body. You could get ready for that. You know, the burial, cremation, whatever, however the family wanted to do it. And now you're waiting, and having to go to court, and just can't. I can't come to grips with any of that.
Well, I think how sad it is. I mean, your husband, your dad, is gone. You know, he's missing, and then somebody stumbles on to just a small amount of remains under super suspicious circumstances, and then he's gone again because the FBI takes him. And you're waiting for an analysis on the cause of death. You're waiting for an analysis on the DNA. And then they don't tell you anything. And at first, they were told that, he died from a tree falling on him. No, that wasn't it. Then he was maybe shot in the back. That wasn't it. And you're never really told what happened, which in many of these cases, if the body is found, they can't determine the cause of death, which is unusual. And we've gotten pretty good in the medical examiner world of determining causes of death. So it's even more suspicious and more unusual when they can't.
Yeah. Well, from the last book about the ones with the ones with the water and the people that were drowning.
Sobering coincidence.
Yeah. It's like, wow. I mean, because they found them in water, so they magically drowned, and you're like, no. Then you start reading some of the details of them, you go, well, that was easy to write because, it's easy to do, and then you start looking at the details and you go, man, that doesn't make sense why they're saying that, but I don't know. I hate that you do that to me. You make me say I don't know a lot, and that's scary.
Well, I think that one of the reasons the books are reviewed so highly is that it's not my great writing skill. It's just the facts that surround these cases speak for themselves. And as you know, Jim, I don't put a lot of opinion in these books. It's just mainly just filled with facts and then the linkage between those facts. And I think a lot of people appreciate that I'm not trying to put an idea in your head about what's going on. I'm just trying to show you what is happening out there.
And it's scary what's happening out there. I mean, 140 cases times a bunch of books, and you've probably got, I'm going to put words in your mouth, but I bet there's another one being wrote.
I can tell you truthfully, I haven't even started on one, but I'm looking at my case file next to me, and I could probably write 3 books on the number of cases I have right now.
I bet. I mean, I'm sure, and like you're saying, they keep coming, so you're going to get that, too. Okay, so what's back, I guess I didn't finish that line of questioning up earlier. So people are looking for, I'm sure you get hundreds, probably, of emails a day about different cases and different things. So how many of these do you actually, I mean, I'm sure you keep all of them, but how many are that necessarily get flagged, so to speak, that pique your interest? You said 2 to 3, but what's the criteria you're looking for when they first come in?
So when they first come in, I'm looking for the response that search and rescue had to the incident. Did they have a canine that tracked the victim? Were they able to pick up a scent? Was there a weather-related event in the area of the person disappearing? Were they hiking with somebody else? Was there an unusual occurrence or a known occurrence that happened that separated them from their friends? Were trackers that were brought in able to track the person from the location they were last seen? So I'm looking for all these things right at the very beginning. Now, if they say, canines were brought in and they couldn't pick up a scent, yeah, they brought in 12 teams of dogs in 4 days and none of them picked up a scent, I'm going to start paying attention. Trackers were brought in, couldn't track from the point the person was last seen, you've got my attention. If there's things in there that weather inhibited the search efforts, I'm paying attention. It's all those things at that early stage that make me kind of nod, make a copy of the event and put it in the side, and I'll pull it again in a couple weeks and see what progress has been made. Those kind of things are important.
And the thing that catches me, it stands out every time I read it in one of your books was I'm just going to say the phrase and I'll let you explain it. Was found somewhere that was already searched.
So this one was a hard one to hone in on after the first 100, 200 cases. But after you read a couple thousand cases, this comes out and it's a big point. And that is found in an area previously searched. So the victim is found in an area that search and rescue had gone over many, many times. And this is not an incriminating statement against the search and rescue people, but this piggybacks off the dogs not being able to find a scent, piggybacks off of helicopters with FLIR that fly an area and can't pick up a heat signature of a body. And then all of a sudden one day the body's found sometimes laying across a trail that's been walked and hiked by hundreds of search and rescue people every day. Sometimes it's found in a primary search zone that had been searched and walked dozens and dozens of times. The point being is that it's hard to believe that that person was there when the search and rescue and the canines and the helicopters, all those things don't miss somebody like that. That's not normal. But yet, in hundreds of instances, that is exactly what's happened.
You're going to love this reference. The first time I read that, I thought about Weekend at Bernie's. Like they were dragging, they were looking for the guy, but he was, sitting with his friends eating dinner, whatever, so they didn't find him.
Right.
And it's just, and they're there, but he was there. That's probably the most troubling part of, not that any of this isn't troubling, but the apex of the trouble for me is I can't imagine being a search and rescue person and how that must tear at you, because it tears at me reading these people, reading about these people that do it, let alone being the person doing it.
Well, in the book before this, Missing 411: A Sobering Coincidence, these young men predominantly are found in bodies of water. They've disappeared from a location. They're found days later in a body. They're found in a very small body of water. And that body of water has been searched by sonar, radar, scuba divers. They don't find anything. Then all of a sudden the guy's there. In one instance, I write about that this guy disappears from this party, and they find pieces of his clothing, kind of like he was stripped, going down this block in backyards of various houses. Then he's gone. Days later, his body's found in a golf course pond a couple miles away from he disappeared at this party. It's one of those few instances the cops, whoever worked these cases, was on ball and was paying attention. Because when they pulled his body out of that pond, in many of the instances I write about, clothing's missing and shoes are missing. In this instance, there were shoes missing, but he was wearing white socks. And it had rained for several days in that area and around that pond where he was found. And when the detectives got there and looked at him, one detective said, "Well, this is interesting. His socks are pristine white. He didn't walk into this pond. Somebody carried him into the pond, or he was dropped into the pond. But he didn't walk into the pond." And that goes to kind of the core of all of these disappearances, about how the bodies got where they were. If canines didn't find them, a scent. If trackers couldn't track point to point on the ground, how did they get to where they were? And just in this one instance, this one detective made a statement that was brilliant.
I can't imagine. I would, if they ever find me without my shoes, something horrible happened to me. If I'm out in the woods, just throwing that out there for the record. That's just the truth. I'm not going too far without my shoes. No,
that's it. You don't do that when you're in the woods.
Yep, but like you said, time after time, there's cases, especially some of the hunters leaving their coats behind. It's kind of like, what? It's winter, and they're leaving your stuff. Still baffles me to this. I don't know if I'll ever come to grips with it, which is fine. Well, Dave, I want to thank you for the good work you've put put out there and the research that you've done. I'm assuming you're going to keep digging hard. When the movie gets ready to come out, if you want to come on and tell me and promote it, you know where to find me, obviously.
I appreciate it, Jim, very much.
And anything else you want to say before I hang up on you?
Hey, I appreciate the time and the exposure. Every time I do one of these shows, you know, it helps because it gets me to a different audience and it gives the topic more exposure for the victims and the victims' families. And, you know, hopefully the topic will get in front of more and more people over time, and hopefully the numbers will get reduced.
Yeah, I guess that point didn't get lost on me because there's people. I mean, it seems almost an alarming rate now. I guess it's easier to find the information about them too, to a degree. But it just seems like the amount of people going missing. Well, because you mentioned satellite phones and even cell phones, it just seems alarming to me that people are going missing currently at the rate that they're going missing. But
so true.
So I guess everybody out there, stay found because I want you to tune in. But, Dave, again, thank you, and I'm going to wrap up here.
Thanks, Jim.
And it's just a remarkable show. I want to thank David again for hanging out with me tonight. Brings me to my directadlinks.com. Final thought. He won't get into what he thinks is going on, so that's why I didn't even bother to ask him. He keeps his opinion out of these interviews, which is good. Well, mostly. I mean, I messaged him about that, so we're just going to leave it at that. So we're going to get close to wrapping this bad boy up. Now, I'm going to tell you, great show tonight, great show last week with John Carmen. Next week, telling you, I'm excited about next week's guest. I know, I don't normally tease these things, but next week, come back. Give the Mallory Report one more shot. Got another exciting author on. Man, it's so exciting to have him on. I have no idea how I managed to land this one. No clue, but it's exciting. I'm excited. Just good times for the report. So tell a friend. What's the old line? Listen, review, subscribe. I think that's what my tagline is here. I've been going with for the last few weeks. So please go ahead and get out there and listen, review, and subscribe to the Mallory Report. Tell everybody you know. Great things are going on. I'm excited. A lot of people were excited around the show. A lot of great people put their time, from Julia to Brian to Sean, who's been doing some great news, to my boy Germantown Runner, who's going to start doing some weather information for us. So it's just not me. I may be the voice you hear, but there's a bunch of people driving this product home. I just can't thank them all enough. But till next week, keep quacking. And we're going to find that file somewhere. That's it. I've had enough. We're out.
Before we flip that on-air sign to the off position, a quick reminder. For all things about the report, previews and reviews, go to TMR247.com.
Shows the knowledge and walk away the mysteries. Now these people, they know our name. The Mallard Report.
Good night.
That's it.